리플 가격이 지난 24시간 동안 3% 가깝게 오르며 0.55달러 선을 회복했습니다. 시가총액 기준으로 6번째로 큰 암호화폐인 XRP 가격은 현재 코인마켓캡 기준으로 0.5546달러를 기록 중입니다. 암호화폐의 전문 매체 코인게이프는 XRP 커뮤니티는 역사적으로 중요한 이정표인 1달러에 도달할 수 있기를 간절히 기대하고 있고, 리플랩스의 기본 토큰인 XRP는 1년 넘게 0.5달러에서 등락을 거듭해왔다고 말했습니다. 사상 최고가는 3.84달러였지만 3년 넘게 1달러를 넘지 못했습니다. 하지만 낮은 가격에도 불구하고 거래량이 많다는 것은 잠재력을 시사한다며, 분석가들은 시장 동향과 변동성을 고려할 때 2024년까지 XRP가 1달러에 도달할 수 있다고 예측하고 있다고 전했습니다. 이러한 가운데 브래드 갈링하우스 리플 최고 경영자는 블룸버그 인터뷰에서 XRP 현물 ETF를 지원할 것인지 묻는 질문에 확실히 환영할 만한 일이라고 답했으며, SEC와 소송에 대해서도 승소 자신감을 내비쳤는데요. 리플이 ETF 개발이 어디까지 진행됐으며 SEC 소송 준비를 어떻게 하고 있는지 알아보겠습니다.
It's worth kind of going back to your case with the SEC first, because you are far along, and as we sit here today on February 20th, how would you describe how the dispute has changed?
Well, look, I think for whatever reason, the SEC decided to make Ripple their first major case around this. And look, the reality prior to the case, we had been advocating for more clarity around the rules and regulations. And the good news has been other countries around the world have leaned into that and codified what should the rules and regulations, what's unique about crypto that needs to be changed. The SEC, frankly, has just hired more litigation that, what we call regulation through enforcement, and really just started suing lots of people. And what's unfortunate is they have lost consistently. They lost the Ripple case on everything they cared about. I mean, even the soundbite you just had up, your Chair Gensler is saying that a lot of these are securities. What the courts have said in the cases they have brought, and certainly the case with Ripple and the token XRP, the court determined that XRP is not in and of itself a security.
When do you think that this will finally no longer be an overhang for you guys? You're one of many companies that are fighting the SEC at this point in time, but when can you call this an all clear? And do you think that this will make it so far as to reach higher courts?
Well, hard to predict whether it's going to reach higher courts. On everything we cared about, we won against the SEC. Will the SEC appeal and move it up the courts? We'll see. They sought approval to do what's called an interlocutory appeal. The courts denied that also. The case against me personally and Chris Larson personally was dismissed entirely with prejudice. So, look, from my point of view, the SEC has lost consistently. They lost the Grayscale case. I think if you're following the Coinbase case, the tone from the judge is, I think, pretty skeptical about some of the SEC's arguments. It stops, I think, when the SEC either realizes they're losing consistently, or you have Congress lean in and write new legislation. That's probably going to be hard in an election year. Maybe we'll see legislation around stablecoins this year, but I'm hopeful and we'll continue to advocate in Washington.
Well, you mentioned the Grayscale case, Brad, and it's Kaylee in Washington. Obviously, that was pretty instrumental in ultimately the SEC granting approval to not just Grayscale's conversion to a spot ETF, GBTC that is, but spot Bitcoin ETFs more broadly. I'm sure you've seen there's buzz out there about potentially an XRP ETF being in the future. What do you make of that speculation?
Well, Kaylee, good to see you. I think it only makes sense there will be other ETFs. It's a little bit like, the earliest days of the stock market. You don't really want exposure to one stock or one company. You want to typically think about diversifying risk and what have you. And so I think we will see other ETFs. When we will see them is hard to predict. The sad reality of what we saw with the Bitcoin ETF is it was only because the courts forced the SEC's hand, and really Chair Gensler's hand, that we saw that finally come to fruition. And look, in my opinion, it makes these markets safer. It makes them more robust. And so this is good for the investment community to kind of lean into that.
So you would welcome an XRP ETF then?
We would certainly welcome it, and I think it's inevitable that there'll be, multiple ETFs around different tokens. And I think you'll even see ETFs potentially around baskets that also, I think, further diversify that risk.
Given there's so much excitement around the ETF dynamic here, are you in talks with the largest issuers, particularly BlackRock, to get this done?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I know BlackRock has said some things publicly. We think it makes sense for the XRP community overall. Ripple obviously is a very important stakeholder in the XRP ecosystem, but we're not the only player. And look, we've seen, before the SEC lawsuit, XRP was the second most valuable digital asset. I think because of the headwinds of that lawsuit, we've now seen that largely abate. But the long-term view on these things is about, how do you create utility and really solve real-world problems with these different digital assets? Bitcoin's doing that very well as a store of value. XRP and its dynamics around being very fast, very efficient, and low cost on a per transaction basis makes it ideal for payments. And that's where Ripple really has leaned into as a company.
인터뷰에서 내용처럼 리플은 올해 미국 증권거래위원회 SEC와 소송이 마무리될 것으로 내다봤습니다. 록 그랜트 리플 글로벌 정책 총괄 부사장은 블록체인과 암호화폐가 지속적으로 성장함에 따라 규제 명확성이 전 세계로 확대될 것이라고 예측했습니다. 그는 올해 여러 국가들이 규제의 명확성을 부여하기 위해 노력할 것이라며 아랍에미리트가 최근 암호화폐 서비스 통합을 위해 XRP를 승인한 것이 하나의 사례라고 밝히며 이런 흐름 속에서 리플은 올해 SEC와 오랜 소송이 마무리될 것으로 내다봤습니다. 가링하우스는 ETF에 관해서는 당장의 입장은 내놓지 않았지만 분석가들은 소송이 마무리되면 ETF 개발의 속도를 낼 것이라고 내다봤습니다. 이런 호재 소식에도 투자 전략을 못하면 결국 끌려다닐 수밖에 없는데요. 그래서 구독자분들을 위해 제가 책을 준비했는데요. 실제로 이 책은 현재 인터넷에서 판매되고 있는 책이며 무려 3만 원대에 판매가 되고 있습니다. 제가 여러분께 이 책을 무료로 나눠드리는 이유는요. 이 책을 통해서 많은 구독자분들에게 조금이나마 투자에 도움이 되셨으면 하는 마음에 준비했고 제가 직접 구매를 했기 때문에 전액 무료로 우리 구독자 한 분께 나눠드리면서 채널을 키우기 위해서 투자를 하는 것입니다. 010-5886-4840으로 구독이라고 문자를 보내주시면 한 분 빠짐없이 모든 분께 책을 무료로 제공해드리겠습니다. 내가 의지만 있다면 암호화폐 투자 전문가의 전략과 노하우를 무료로 배워볼 수 있는 좋은 기회이니 이 혜택을 모든 분이 누리시고 앞으로도 제 채널을 많이 사랑해 주셨으면 좋겠습니다. 010-5886-4840으로 구독이라고 문자를 보내주시고 무려 정가 3만 원이 넘는 이 책을 무료로 받아가셔서 구독자분들이 투자하는데 큰 도움이 되셨으면 좋겠습니다. 지금까지 시청해 주셔서 감사합니다. 구독과 좋아요, 알람 설정 부탁드립니다.